Before we had the internet, Nintendo Power was a gamer's go-to source to find out which games they should rent or buy. Between issue 20 and 25, the covers actually featured some games that are today considered to be unknown gems, such as the gravity-defying platformer Metal Storm and the very, very underrated Power Blade. But another game I found out about just this past year was also featured during that period, and I believe it deserves to be regarded with a similar esteem. Vice Project Doom.
Remember all those great games we used to play growing up in the 80s and 90s? Most of them are sitting in an attic or garage somewhere, doing nothing but gathering dust. My opinion is, we should give them another look.
Vice Project Doom was featured on the 24th volume of Nintendo Power. My subscription started right at volume 20, so that means that even though it was on the cover of the 4th issue of Nintendo Power I ever got as a kid, I still missed it, and apparently so did a lot of other people because I never hear anybody talking about this game. I have to assume that the awful cover art had a lot to do with that, not to mention it was published by Sammy, who wasn't a household name in the NES era. In fact, Sammy published some less than stellar games, such as Amagon. Ugh, Amagon. But if you can push all of that aside, you'll see that you missed out on a really fun game. In Vice Project Doom, you play as Detective Quinn Hart, who with the aid of his partner and lover Christy, are assigned to investigate the Beta Corporation, following the disappearance of his former partner Reese during a previous investigation. The Beta Corporation is involved in the development of electronic equipment and military weaponry. It turns out, though, that the corporation is actually run by aliens that have been living on Earth for years in secrecy. The aliens have developed a substance called gel that is their food, but is also very addictive to humans, and the Beta Corporation sells it as a drug. In order for Detective Hart to locate his lost partner, he will have to uncover the alien secret plot and face the truth of his own existence. I really have no idea what's happening here. Thankfully I'm playing a game and not reading a novel or watching a movie. Gameplay is what's really important, and thankfully Vice Project Doom has great variety. Vice Project Doom is a multi-genre action game. What is a multi-genre action game, you say? Well, it features multiple gameplay modes. The game starts as a top-down shooter driving combination, where the goal is to chase down the suspect in your awesome muscle car. The second mode is my favorite, and where the game really shines. You guessed it, side-scrolling action platforming. The game is almost 85% action platforming, which is great because it is really well done. The third mode is a first-person shooter, which I typically do not love, but thankfully the shooting stages are short and never get overly hectic. Honestly, these shooting stages aren't terrible, and I actually enjoy them. All three gameplay modes are part of the rich tapestry that makes this game so unique and fun. Ah, that's a multi-genre game. Kinda like Bayou Billy, except not as mind-numbingly frustrating. Most games have a hard time perfecting their controls, and that's with only one gameplay mode. Vice Project Doom does a fantastic job of creating fluid controls across all three modes. The top-down shooting driving stages are extremely easy and enjoyable to play due to their fluid controls. I could easily compare the controls and gameplay to some of the best shooters on the system. The first-person shooting stages are usually a chore without a light gun,
But honestly, the sensor target moves really well and gives you ample time to deal with the carnage on the screen. Last but not least is the side-scrolling platforming stages, which are really good. Your primary attack is a laser whip that I really enjoyed using. You can also use two ranged weapons that are easy to switch between. In terms of the platforming itself, the great controls make the interesting and well-designed levels a pleasure to explore.
Wow, this game really does control well, and that's essential for a good game. But a great game has more than just solid controls, and Vice Project Doom brings some fantastic visuals to the table.
So, you may not agree with me right away, as the very first stage is a driving stage where the graphics are actually pretty bland. What really impressed me was the very first platforming stage, and specifically the cityscape in the scrolling background. Not to mention the character design is really solid as well, especially Detective Hart. The enemy design is pretty decent too, but the stage bosses are really well drawn large characters that have some fantastic animations. The shooting stage features some really well drawn large characters, but I will admit the background colors used for these levels are not aesthetically pleasing. Of course, I left the very best for last, and that is the between level cutscenes, which are just impressive for the NES and rival the excellent cutscenes from Ninja Gaiden. They actually do a great job of purveying the somewhat convoluted storyline.
It's easy to tell that this was a later NES release, as the graphics stand up with some of the early 16-bit games on the TurboGrafx and Sega Genesis, but you still may be skeptical about playing this game. We all know the term NES hard that turns some gamers away from playing games like this. But surprisingly, the challenge is reasonable.
At no point is this game needlessly difficult, but that doesn't mean it isn't challenging. The difficulty is right at the point where you can enjoy the great action platforming. Of course, like a lot of other NES platformers, you get knocked backwards when you are hit, but you can avoid these difficult situations by taking out potential enemies with one of your ranged projectile weapons. The game also features unlimited continues and a really good checkpoint system that cuts out the unnecessary repetition of levels. This is especially helpful when it comes to the great boss battles that seem extremely difficult if you just attack them head on. But once you know the boss's patterns, they almost become too easy. That is, all except for the last boss, who I had to face at least 30 times before I passed just his first stage, which is kind of a mirror battle. The second form is really cool looking, but extremely cheap unless you are positioned just right. Again, once you learn his pattern, and with a little luck, you can beat him no problem.
Man, Vice Project Doom. Easily one of my favorite surprise games since I started collecting for the NES again. Hopefully after watching this, you'll try the game out and enjoy it as much as I did, because I think it's a great game that's largely overlooked. Anyways, this is MichaelBtheGameGenie, and I'll talk to you next time. Man, I am so glad I held onto my Nintendo power since I was a kid. I'd hate to try to have to collect these again.